I am well aware that this audience gathers weekly and has done so for 2 decades now for an astounding array of learned presentations, especially concerning masterpieces of Islamic art. I'm not an Islamicist, but my studies of Europe's Middle Ages have brought me increasingly into contact with the Islamic world, just like the best of the medieval artists. And it has taken me, like them, on a kind of pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So tonight I'd like to do something else with you than what you usually do. I'd like to share with you my impressions, indeed the memories, formed along the way as I have been preparing the exhibition for the Metropolitan in 2016. So here we go. From today's vantage point, the city of Jerusalem often seems destined to host unending, unrelenting conflict among the 3 Abrahamic religions that deem it holy. Sectarian conflict is sadly the easiest of tales to tell. Jerusalem's history is in fact much more nuanced. In the Middle Ages, what I call the Middle Ages as a Western medievalist, from about 1000 to 1400 of the Common Era, the city of Jerusalem was home to more cultures, faiths, and languages than at any other period. At that time, Jerusalem was both the setting for productive coexistence and the backdrop for strife. But through times of peace and war, the city did not cease to inspire art of great beauty and fascinating complexity. The exhibition Jerusalem in the Middle Ages, scheduled to take place at the Metropolitan in September of 2016, will celebrate this. It will explore the ways in which multiple competitive and complementary religious traditions, fueled by an almost universal preoccupation with that singular sacred place, gave rise to one of the most creative periods in the city's history. The exhibition, which I have the privilege to be organizing along with my colleague Melanie Holcomb, will demonstrate the key role that Jerusalem played in shaping art of the 11th to the 14th centuries, perceived from a European perspective as the Middle Ages, so forgive me for that term, and in turn show how the art of these centuries left an indelible mark on the Holy City. Medieval Jerusalem was truly international, attracting the devotion of people from as far north as Scandinavia, as far west as Spain, south to Ethiopia, and as far east as present-day China. I'm showing you images from the publication of Bernhard von Breidenbach's Pilgrimage to the Holy Land of 1486, of Greeks, Syrians, and Saracens, as portrayed by the artist Erhard Reiwich, who accompanied Breidenbach, a canon of Mainz Cathedral, on his trip to Jerusalem. Patrons and artists, poets and scholars from Islamic, Christian, and Jewish tradition alike focused their attention on the city, praising its magic, endowing its sacred buildings, and creating luxury goods for its residents. This artistic richness was particularly in evidence in the period we have identified, and it arose in the wake of natural and political disasters that lay waste to the great buildings and even the walls of Jerusalem. It was then fueled by the fierce battles of the Crusades. Once the Crusaders were driven out, it was sustained by those sultans blessed with stable reigns who, though based in Cairo, promoted the city as a spiritual and scholarly center. So let me give you a sense of the scale and scope of our exhibition project. Some of the images that you will see in this lecture are of works for which signatures on dotted line are already in hand. Others are still in negotiation and very much longed for, rather like the city of Jerusalem itself. Essentially, I'll be giving you a sneak preview. Installed in the premier exhibition space of the Metropolitan, the exhibition will comprise some 200 to 225 works in a wide range of media, from jeweled reliquaries to evocative architectural fragments, from colorful enameled glass to richly painted manuscripts, from exquisite jewelry to intricately carved ivory. The art is culturally diverse and steadfastly defies easy categorization. Here, for example, you see a Christian illumination of the story of the Maccabees, celebrated in the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. Elsewhere in the exhibition, there will be Hebrew manuscripts that draw on Christian visual tradition. Metalwork with Christian subjects made for Muslim patrons will appear alongside metalwork typical of the Islamic world, which was acquired by Christians. As you see here in an example, this great basin from the Rijksmuseum, made for a European noblewoman, it bears inscriptions in both Latin and Arabic. Medieval Jerusalem was, in the words of Simon Montefiore, author of Jerusalem, a Biography, a hybrid metropolis of hybrid buildings and hybrid people. Its art was beautifully hybrid as well, as the exhibition will soundly demonstrate. Now, works of art from the Holy Land are today dispersed throughout the world. Thus, the exhibition will display objects from about 60 lenders in over a dozen countries. As you can glean from the basin from the Rijksmuseum, some of these reside in major museum collections in Europe, others in museums of the Middle East. Still others are in places that are unexpected and difficult of access, above all in private collections and religious communities, like the marble frieze from the tomb of Christ in the Holy Sepulchre, the property of the Franciscans of Jerusalem. Indeed, many promised works are kept in closed treasuries or hidden storerooms. A significant number have never been lent, and most have never been seen side by side. And some have not left Jerusalem since the Middle Ages. The project also benefits from the extraordinary breadth of the Metropolitan's own collections. The exhibition will have works from 5 distinct departments within our museum: medieval art and the cloisters, my department, Islamic, arms and armor, Asian, and prints and drawings, taking advantage of the Met's encyclopedic holdings. To bring the city to life, the galleries will be augmented by large-scale photographs. Perhaps no city is more photographed than Jerusalem, and yet stock photography curiously neglects the many medieval monuments that enrich the city. I'm sharing with you one of my favorites, this fountain in the Old City. You can see that the columns at either side are actually of Crusader origin. They have been then set into this fountain in the Mamluk period, and further enriched in the Ottoman period with that great inscription, and finally decorated for Ramadan with the colored lights at the top. Special commissioned photographs, with or without the colored lights, will capture the many artful details that the average visitor to Jerusalem passes by without remark. No exhibition previously has attempted to unravel the various cultural traditions and aesthetic strands that made medieval Jerusalem a magnet for artists and patrons. These crucial years have barely received a nod within sweeping exhibitions devoted to, say, 3,000 years of the city's history, which seem somehow seamlessly to leap from the Second Temple to the advent of Zionism. A number of previous exhibitions have focused exclusively on the Crusades, reinforcing a problematic assertion that the arrival of Western warriors was the driving force in the region, historically and aesthetically, and moreover implying, or at least allowing an inference to be taken, that such militaristic adventures are somehow worthy of nostalgia. Meanwhile, the important medieval Islamic contribution to the city of Jerusalem has gone virtually unnoticed. Exhibitions devoted to Fatimid or Mamluk art have overlooked Jerusalem's artistic heritage because the city, which was not a political capital, has been mistakenly perceived as provincial. All of these approaches, beholden to political history of the period or to the academic compartmentalization that separates works of art by faith tradition, have suppressed the overlapping histories, points of contact, and complexity that the city engendered and that find their brilliant reflection in works of art. The Metropolitan's exhibition will be the first to outline this new narrative of the Holy City. Western Crusaders will play an important role in our narrative, to be sure, but they stand among a rich range of perspective, all of which are vital to understanding the special character of the city. There was more to medieval Jerusalem than East meets West. We find there both harmonious and dissonant voices, And this was a feature that no visitor of the period failed to notice. Our chroniclers talk about Arabic-speaking Muslims and Christians, Greeks, Syrians, Armenian, Georgians, Copts, Ethiopians, Samaritans, Rabbinites, and Karaites living cheek by jowl in a space not much larger than Midtown Manhattan. By broadening our focus beyond the Crusades, the exhibition necessarily realigns the chronological boundaries that have constrained our understanding of the city. The Crusaders' campaign was only one iteration of a renewed focus on the city that inspired members of many faith communities. Jerusalem was a vital cultural center well before crusading knights scaled its walls, thanks to the proximity to the important Fatimid political centers of Cairo, Ramla, and Ashkelon, as well as to thriving Jewish communities in Fustat and Tiberias. The intensified focus on Jerusalem remains throughout our period, waning only when the Crusader efforts finally lose steam and Mamluk attention turns elsewhere. From the turn of the 11th century to the end of the 14th, the city teems with locals and tourists, new arrivals and long-timers, merchants and artists, soldiers and scholars, all of whom contribute to shape the city and its art. I love these images because if it weren't for the water bottle to the left of the bread and the possible Coca-Cola sign to one side, we could actually be looking at images from the very period that I'm talking about. The exhibition will examine the specific factors that made medieval Jerusalem an exceptional source of artistic inspiration. We envision 5 distinct sections. One will focus on the pluralism of the city and region in our period, a key aspect repeatedly noted in chronicles of the time. And I should just note that the wealth of chronicles that we have from in multiple languages and from multiple nationalities and perspectives is one of the great riches that we're able to draw on. So I've chosen just for you tonight a single example of the pluralism as noted by a Roman Catholic bishop of Acre, who notes from all parts of the world, all tribes and tongues, and from every people under heaven, drawn by the sweet odor of the holy places, pilgrims devoted to God and religious of all orders rushed to the Holy Land. As Jacques de Vitry witnessed in the 13th century, dozens of denominations and communities contributed to the artistic and spiritual richness of the Holy Land, and the exhibition will emphasize that plurality. Like Jacques de Vitry, our present-day visitors will be astonished by the numerous distinctive alphabets and the different languages of prayer. Exemplifying this will be a Christian gospel book in Arabic, the Samaritan translation of the Torah into Arabic, with notes in Aramaic at the bottom, and the biblical book of Kings in Ge'ez, the language of Ethiopia, given by that land's king to his community in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is often described as a city of 3 faiths, a formulation that sadly underestimates its religious complexity. No religion was in fact monolithic, and in the Middle Ages, as now, the city's artistic culture benefited from the distinct perspectives and rivalries that often emerged from various sects. Consider these images taken last month, one Sunday morning in the Holy Sepulchre. The Ethiopians celebrating at the left, the Syriacs in the middle, and the Copts at the right. And I've left out the Greeks and the Franciscans and Armenians, all of whom I also saw that same morning. In our period, more than 6 different Christian denominations venerated the Holy Sepulchre, believed to be the burial place of Jesus, and prayed and studied at nearby sacred sites and monasteries. Their respective interests will find expression in illuminated manuscripts. Here you see Armenian, Greek, and Georgian, as well as in sculpture and liturgical objects. And we're very fortunate that for the first time ever, the Armenian Patriarchate in Jerusalem has agreed to send treasures from its library and sacristy to the United States. Among the liturgical objects in the exhibition will be the distinctive crosses that the Mamluk sultans officially permitted the Ethiopian community to carry. So not only to celebrate Mass, but to carry their hand crosses. These will be borrowed from a private collection in the United Kingdom. Within medieval Jerusalem, the competing views of the Karaites and Rabbinites will be demonstrated by means of books and letters borrowed from the Jewish Theological Seminary, and by a tiny 11th century carnelian seal in a New York private collection that has a Hebrew inscription referring to Jerusalem as the Holy City. Within Islam, Ismaili Fatimid and Sunni Mamluk metalwork represent distinct artistic achievements, each of which will be featured thanks to generous loans. A second section of the exhibition will focus on cultural exchange through trade and tourism. Tourism, by which I also include, of course, what I really mean is pilgrimage, right? Which chroniclers like Ibn Jubayr tell us manage even to thrive in the face of war. And he says, though the fires of discord burn between the two parties, Muslim and Christians, two armies of them may meet and dispose themselves in battle array, and yet Muslim and Christian travelers will come and go between them without interference. If one needed convincing of the importance of the Holy Land to the global market in the Middle Ages, it has been amply demonstrated in the discovery just 2 short months ago of more than 2,000 Fatimid gold dinars in the waters off the coast of Caesarea. Prior to that discovery, the largest hoard found in the Holy Land consisted of about 300 pieces found in the 1960s in Ramla. Coins in the new hoard, consisting of whole dinars and quarter dinar, were minted in the reigns of al-Hakim, the Caliph born of a Christian mother who notoriously, not the mother, the son, notoriously destroyed much of the Holy Sepulchre, and al-Zahir, his son, who rebuilt much of Jerusalem after a devastating earthquake in 1033. More than 100 of these coins will travel to New York for our exhibition. Often understood as the crossroads of the known world, Jerusalem was a thriving urban center, catering to both residents and pilgrims. Travelers to the city regularly remarked upon its splendid domed bazaars brimming with rare wares of every kind. Peace among people of different traditions was often fragile and uneasy, but business was pragmatic. A French pilgrim of the 12th century speaks of Syrian and Latin goldsmiths working in proximity to each other near the Holy Sepulchre. And a Jewish traveler from Italy marvels at the Jewish and Muslim merchants working side by side without jealousy. The exhibition will feature hoards of jewelry found in the city and its environs that contain a mixture of materials. The shared taste of Jerusalem's wealthy inhabitants confounds efforts to distinguish the owners' identities, let alone their ethnic or religious heritage. Other works from the marketplace include both ceramics and textiles. Extrapolating from fragmentary finds from archaeological sites in Jerusalem, the exhibition will feature the range of locally produced and imported ceramics known to have been used in the city. Similarly, research on textiles allows us to reconstruct the fashion sensibilities of Jerusalem's residents, including, surprisingly perhaps, their predilection for printed cottons from the Indian subcontinent. Showing at the right the cotton market of Jerusalem's old city, which now specializes in candy rather than textiles, hence the young customer that you see there. And some of you may also be aware of the recent book about the Muslim Indian hospice in Jerusalem, which was established in our period. Even more than merchants, religious pilgrims found their way to the city. The exhibition will include an Arab trading map of the eastern Mediterranean coast and a Venetian map that inventories Christian holy sites. With these, a variety of objects will evoke the pilgrim's journey, including navigational devices, canteens for water, and monuments commemorating the travelers who successfully completed the long and perilous journey. Pilgrims eagerly sought souvenirs in the form of locally made wares, relics, and even weaponry. And I'm showing you on the screen a piece from our own collection at the Metropolitan, actually at the Cloisters. This has been in the Cloisters collection since 1925. It's an image of a French knight. We know his name was Jean d'Allouis from early descriptions of the church in which his recumbent figure appears. And for some reason, it took until this exhibition project for anyone to have the notion that maybe we ought to clean this sculpture. And you see him half cleaned at the right. You'll have to wait until you come to New York to see the final result, but it's a magnificent stone sculpture, and as he's being cleaned, the beautiful kind of swelling of his muscles and the lines of his hair are becoming more apparent. And curiously, the sword that he wears at his side, those specialists in arms and armor have identified as being distinctively Chinese. So this Frenchman came back from the Holy Land having acquired a Chinese sword along the way, and that is how he chose to be represented for eternity. An unprecedented assemblage of true cross reliquaries brought home from Jerusalem to Europe will attest to the broad geographic range of their veneration. Here are two remarkable examples. The one on your right tells the story of the finding of the cross at the initiative of Helen, mother of the Holy Roman Emperor Constantine. Hers was an archaeological adventure in the Holy Land worthy of Indiana Jones, complete with a certain amount of malfeasance and intrigue, but ultimately resulting in a highly successful dig. The one on the left certainly comes from the region of Limoges in central France, in fact, from a particular monastery that was very proud of its links to the Holy Land. But whereas I have long believed it was made in France, I have come to wonder if it was in fact created in the Holy Land because of certain similarities that I recently observed on a cross brought home from Acre, preserved today in Namur, Belgium. And again, you can decide for yourselves when you come to the exhibition. The third section of the exhibition will showcase the sanctity of Jerusalem, both shared and contested. In the words of Imad ad-Din, a chronicler of Saladin, Jerusalem is the place that the great saints of the earth and angels of heaven visit. Holiness is, of course, the most salient feature of Jerusalem. The exhibition will evoke its sacred iconic monuments with their layered history and shared spaces. Happily, many works of art mimic the signature features of the city, notably its prominent gates and domes. These range from Ashkenaz manuscript depictions of the city gates to a humble domed ceramic lamp that surprisingly pairs a rose window with an ogive arch, emblematic of Christian and Islamic architecture, respectively. The layering of history will be in evidence with works, especially those carved in imported prized white marble not native to Palestine, that were preserved and repurposed by subsequent owners. Among these is part of an elegant Byzantine transana panel that's created to define and separate the altar area of the church. Well, it was flipped over and reused on the floor of the Holy Sepulchre during the Crusader period, and only rediscovered during modern renovations that the Franciscans undertook at the building. Significant sculpture from the city will include a relief of the entry to Jerusalem, excavated in the 19th century in the city, which is a promised loan from the Louvre. This is close stylistically and thematically to the lintel that was over the entrance to the Holy Sepulchre until after the earthquake in the 1920s, evoking that lintel, but also demonstrating that themes like this echoed throughout the city's monuments. Two important sources of sculptures are the Lapidarium of the Franciscans and the Museum of the Greek Patriarch, neither of which has been open to the public for decades, despite what you might read in any blue guide to Jerusalem, which will tell you that they're open. They're not. Our visitors will be surprised to learn that seemingly immutable elements of Jerusalem's sacred topography today have in fact changed bit by bit since the Middle Ages. Crusader maps, manuscript depictions of the city, and European chronicles reveal that medieval Christians mistakenly understood the Dome of the Rock and the Aqsa Mosque to be the ancient temple and the Palace of Solomon, respectively. Happily, this confusion helped ensure the preservation of the Haram al-Sharif throughout the century of Crusader rule. Upon the reconquest of Jerusalem, Saladin and his troops were amazed to find everything intact, and they needed only to remove a cross from the top of the dome and to re-sanctify the entire area with rose water. And so it has come safely down to the modern day and to the boy you see here, fêting Ramadan with his Burak balloon. Even among experts, the fact that the Western Wall, the most sacred site in Jerusalem today for Jewish pilgrims, was only a minor stop for their medieval counterparts is little known. Devotion to this space is largely a phenomenon of the age of photography. The Mount of Olives was much more significant in medieval Jewish ritual. Here you see at the bottom right of the manuscript page, a juvenile tree juxtaposed to the golden implements of the temple. It struggles to thrive on a small hillock that stands in for the Mount of Olives. Rendered by an artist far, far away from the Holy Land, this frail sapling is nothing like the hearty and venerable trees that grace the Mount of Olives, but that's how the artist saw it. No less resonant are prayerful evocations and images of Jerusalem's gates, especially the Gate of Mercy, located on the eastern wall of the temple area. The exhibition will bring to light this rich and little-known body of material, both visual and literary, that pays homage to these sites. Sacred masterpieces, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, will dominate the exhibition, but even they can be difficult to recognize. The exhibition will include, for example, inlaid metalwork representing Christian figures on vessels with Arabic inscriptions and made in a style associated with Islamic art. People, and even some scholars, tend to forget that many Christians in the Holy Land were and are Arabic speakers with aesthetic sensibilities in common with the majority Muslim community. As the political and religious landscape of the Holy Land changed, monuments and works of art were reused by successive owners. A marble palimpsest, which juxtaposes the elegant royal script of the Fatimids with the bold geometry of Crusader shields, superimposed less than a century later, magnificently illustrates this phenomenon. I see everyone in the audience going like this and trying to read the Arabic inscription. It's very funny because we were just asking ourselves if this is the way it's currently installed on exhibition in Jerusalem, and we're just asking ourselves, maybe we'll turn it the other way around when we show it, because the shields are easily to recognize as heraldic shields, but it is kind of hard to read the inscription this way. So now I think you've convinced me that we need to show this piece vertically. But as a visual emblem and a historical marker, this offers a bracing reminder of the fleeting nature of conquest. And to that end, I should say that the exhibition will also critically examine the themes of holy war as they were understood at this time. This is an important opportunity to present a nuanced view of these concepts so charged in our own day and their very potent images. The supposed beauty of war is manifest, proclaimed not only in illustrated histories and weaponry, but on luxury goods. The celebrated Shah Abbas Bible from the Morgan Library, which is the manuscript that you see on the screen, self-righteously asserts that the Crusaders are following a divinely sanctioned militaristic tradition of Joshua and David. And similarly, on the cutting that you saw earlier from the Italian choir book, Crusaders claimed the mantle of the Maccabees as justification for what they were up to. A rare drawing of the period, an icon, and a silver scabbard all bear witness to the widespread admiration for a military hero like St. George, admired then as now by both Christians and Muslims in the Holy Land. Interestingly, in two of these examples, we cannot discern the specific religious background of the original owner. An undeniably sensitive subject, the notion of holy war is vital to understanding works of art that serve to raise the grim reality of war to an elevated plane. The fourth section of the exhibition will celebrate the city's great patrons. Something of their motivation is suggested in this text by the biographer of Sultan Baybars. When he learned that the durability of buildings would fulfill for their builder the role of longevity and revive their name if forgotten, he preoccupied himself with constructing edifices of this world and the hereafter. In our period, Jerusalem was blessed with generous patrons who built and reshaped its sanctuaries. The exhibition will introduce visitors to some of the real men and women who altered the aesthetic landscape of the city and the art produced there. Melisande, the Frankish Armenian queen of Jerusalem, and Saladin, the renowned Ayyubid who wrested Jerusalem from the Crusaders, are perhaps the best known. Melisande's name is linked to a great psalter that we hope to present as a larger witness to her activity as patron of churches and scriptoria. Saladin is known for the beautifully illustrated treatise on armor that he commissioned. And if the stars align, the exhibition will present both it and a manuscript praising him, which belongs to a Palestinian private library. Juxtaposed to appropriate images of the city still today, these will by extension serve to suggest his larger role as a patron of mosques and hospitals, and hers as a patron of churches and religious communities. And that, of course, can be seen in a single monument in Jerusalem, the Church of St. Anne, which became the madrasa of Saladin simply by the addition of certain renovations and the addition of an inscription at the entrance proclaiming the new purpose. An unprecedented gathering of luxury metalwork will evoke the patronage of Sultan al-Nasr Mohammed ibn Khaldun. This dazzling display appropriately conjures up the munificence of this most important Mamluk patron of Jerusalem, who, among other projects, sponsored the restoration of the Dome of the Rock. And in that regard, I particularly love this incense box, which somehow to me almost seems like a miniature kind of Dome of the Rock. Sultan Barkuk was responsible for the building of a mosque in Jerusalem that still bears his name. As a significant number of enameled glass mosque lamps are inscribed with his name, the exhibition will bring these together as the representative of him in a kind of splendid array. Varying in decoration, these will be gathered from collections on 3 continents. And just by way of reference, the 3 from the Victoria and Albert Museum, none is currently on exhibition, but they will be cleaned and prepared for the exhibition, which is really very thrilling. The 5th and final section of the exhibition will explore the widespread and persistent longing for Jerusalem and the end of days, and I've chosen to show you 3 separate texts about that. The first by a monk of Marsaba, the hauntingly beautiful monastery near Jerusalem, in which he says, In all the family of men, believing and unbelieving, among all the heathen, Jews and Saracens, there was a heart longing to see Jerusalem. And then from this Sunni scholar, Allah, may he be exalted and magnified, will come with the angels under a canopy of clouds to the land of Beit al-Maqdis. And then from the Spanish Jewish poet, philosopher of the 12th century, can we have hope or certainty in east or west, or anywhere but in the one land full of gates that face the open gates of heaven? The longing for Jerusalem as both an earthly and a heavenly home is a theme that's common to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And some of the most exquisite objects of the Middle Ages, ranging from gilded censers to jeweled reliquaries to deluxe manuscripts, were inspired by the city on the hill. This is a particularly rich area in which to explore the artistic and intellectual interactions among Jews, Muslims, and Christians, fueled by the shared fascination with the city's architecture and intensified by yearning from afar. Jews living beyond Jerusalem's walls dreamed of the reestablishment of the temple. In nearby Cairo, Maimonides sketched its outline, while in faraway Provence, artists depicted a spectacular array of temple implements in gilded Hebrew manuscripts. Among the masterpieces of Hebrew manuscript illumination that will be featured is this Sephardic Bible from a private collection that has never before been shown publicly. In the Crusader era, Nur al-Din's longing for the city gave focus and meaning to his political ambitions and military campaigns. We hope to find a way somehow to evoke his lost minbar, especially commissioned for the Aqsa Mosque and repeatedly admired by Muslims and Christians in the Middle Ages for its beauty and its craftsmanship. There's a touching story from the 13th century of a bond of friendship established between the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II and the Qadi of Jerusalem, a friendship born of the shared appreciation of the beauty of this minbar. The original, as you all know, was tragically lost to civilization in the fire started by a deranged evangelical Christian in 1969. Only fragments survive in the Islamic Museum, Jerusalem, which you see there. A slide of an image of some of those fragments. Majestic replacement, of course, is now installed in the Aqsa Mosque, the gift of the King of Jordan. So we don't know yet. There are 19th century photographs, especially by a French photographer called Boehm, and we may use those historic images to help suggest it, or we may try to see if we can perhaps borrow some of the drawings that were done for the replacement. We haven't quite figured whatever we do will be inadequate. There's no getting around it, but we can't ignore the importance of this lost work of art in this story. 2 of the 3 surviving volumes from a Quran decorated for Nur al-Din, long held in private hands, will be an exhibition highlight. We know from documentary sources that supplying the Aqsa Mosque with Quran manuscripts was one of the first orders of business for Saladin after the reconquest of Jerusalem. And we can imagine that manuscripts like this were part of that effort. Finally, an intended, if ultimately unsuccessful, effort to regain the Holy Land in the 14th century seems to have motivated the creation of the cloister's apocalypse. In the climactic scene of this manuscript, the city of Jerusalem appears before St. John as a glowing silver edifice. Likely, such a perfect city can be imagined only with the help and in the presence of an angel. Pictures of Jerusalem today look quite different from St. John's vision. People around the world who come to our exhibition will bring with them their own beliefs, their own memories, their own sense of what distinguishes the city, what makes it sacred, and what makes it theirs. With more earthly limitations than angels, we hope both to affirm and confound their expectations, and to leave them in turn with a new, lustrous image of Jerusalem. Shukran. We hope to see you in New York in 2016.